Today we're so happy to talk with Miss Mary Lee Alexander. She lived in Mooresville many years ago, moved to Oregon, and then has retired back in town. And Mary Lee has a lot of information to tell us about her childhood as well as World War II. And then I would like to move into an area of what it was like coming back to Mooresville to see all the changes that we have had here in town. So Mary Lee, let's just start. First of all, growing up in Mooresville, because your parents were from this area, and so you had a lot of experiences from the very beginning in this town. So what was it like that you remember? What are some of your fond memories of growing up?
Well, I think I could preface it by saying I did not grow up in Mooresville, but on Route 3 of Mooresville in the Prospect Presbyterian community. And growing up there, we were not farmers. My father was not a farmer, but we were surrounded by farmers. My mother came from a farming family, but Dad took courses from County Extension Services and learned everything he could about anything that he was interested in the farm, like contour farming, for instance. And everything that he learned, we learned. And it made it fascinating. And it was a very happy, like we were cut off. We had the Hart family on the next farm, and we were the closest to them. There was a Hart for every Alexander and a couple extra. And our life, though, was a bit different from our neighbors because Dad was not a farmer. And, for instance, we had books all over the place, and that is where I became a bookaholic, and I am a bookaholic. And Dad, I'd crawl up on his lap at night, and he would read from a book, and I didn't want him to stop. Well, and then we'd take it up the next night. And he encouraged us, of course. He encouraged learning of all sorts. And we were a happy family. We had no money. It's called, I forget, dirt poor we were. But we had lots of love, lots of laughter, and which tied us together closely. When we grew up, that fell apart to an extent, which happens in lots of families. But it was just a very happy childhood. Couldn't want for anything nicer. And there was a change brought about when I was just finished the 7th grade, and I meant to check the date on this, but it can be checked out. The year that all of the rural schools in Iredell County were closed and the students were moved into the town schools. And so I came into Mooresville High School in the 8th grade, where the teachers nor the students wanted us. It was a strange situation, and the only time in my life I ever felt discriminated against. But it was their loss, you know. They thought we were dumb dummies. And we were, of course, in their minds, I suppose. But, for instance, in the 8th grade, It's in an English class. I can't mention the teacher. But I had to give a book report. And so I had read Don Quixote. And the teacher wanted to know who read it for me. Now this was the 8th grade, and it was very, very fun. But any book I could get hold of that I had not read, I read. And sometimes I haven't understood half of it, but things fell into place. But that year was a critical year in my life. I did not enjoy high school at all. Never did. Couldn't wait for graduation. And maybe it was good for me, though. Who knows? I don't know any of the people that I went to high school with. I just don't know them. I knew so few people in Mooresville. Only a couple people, I suppose, did I know in the town. I knew Harry Deaton, who was the editor of the Tribune, whatever, only because he was Dad's first cousin. And what else? The years, though, of my childhood, I realized it set my path for life. It had to do with a craving for learning, for one thing, and even at a Bible, one example, in a Bible, what is it, summer Bible class? It's summer school, Bible school. A young minister of our church, Chester Denham, he set the program for that summer on the travels of Paul. And he did such a magnificent job that I could just see every spot that Paul had been in, every little nook and cranny, and got to know those areas quite well. And I can remember him also putting some Arabic, not figures.
Script or whatever.
What?
Script.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, on the blackboard. And that absolutely fascinated me. And later, I think that's why shorthand came so easily to me. All these little marks that meant something, you know, and I'd always think about that. But also, when I went back to school after I retired, so many of my classes had to do with the area where Paul had traveled. I think this is most unusual. And some Iranian students were in my class. But that all got started, if you can imagine. I have no idea how old I was in this Bible school study class. Not very old, though. Say around 8 or 10. I don't know what else I could add to that part of my life.
Whenever you finished high school, then did you leave and go to Washington at that time, or what
I
happened?
did not.
Okay.
I got a job, government job, at the quartermaster depot in Charlotte, which was under the Army. And I worked there until I went to Europe.
Oh,
A recruiter from Washington came, and she talked with me, and she said, "You're the kind of person we want in some of our overseas places." And so she left an application for me, and she said, "If you ever think about it, just fill this out and send it to me." And so I got very bored because the depot had accomplished what it set out to do, and I can't sit idle. And so I filled out the application, sent it in, and as a result, I got a transfer to Italy, to Trieste, Italy, which at that time was a free territory governed under a tripartite agreement between the French, British, and Americans. And I was the general's secretary. In fact, I was every general's secretary that then came. They were all, what's a 2-star? Or I forgot. Not major, that's 3. But that too was interesting because the first general that I worked for was transferred to Korea. He was an engineer, graduate of West Point, and a very fine man. And while he was gone, we were evacuated from Trieste because there was a little disagreement between Yugoslavia and Italy about where the dividing line was going to be. And it was, I was the last female to leave the Free Territory, except for some nurses. And I went up to Heidelberg, Germany, because by this time that first general had gone to Korea and had come back cross country and ended up in Heidelberg as the U.S. Army Europe commander. And when he found out I was going to be evacuated, he asked his aide to call and find out whether I wanted to go home or whether I wanted to stay in Europe. I wanted to stay in Europe, and in that case, told him to find me a job, which they did. And so I worked in Heidelberg for a year and a half. And then Mama was having quite a tough time, and she was not getting any help. And so I went home really on home leave, but I never went back. I got another government job in Charlotte right away, and it had to do with mortgage financing, and I can't add 2 and 2 straight, but I learned how to use a slide rule and to figure out mortgages. You do what you have to do. And the man in charge of the office, he and I didn't get along quite. I could run circles around him. That sounds pretty horrible, but that's the way it was. And so anyway, he had a heart attack, and they all said Mary Lee gave him that heart attack. Anyway, I was transferred to the Washington office of this program, and I was only there for about 2 to 3 years. And the program had just petered out. It had accomplished what it had set out to do, but Congress, for one reason or another, were unwilling to close the program. And so I was all set, and the government, they were seeing how they could put me in line to go upward, and started with an invitation to a luncheon by, what is it, when you can't speak well?
The group was like a Toastmasters group or something?
Well, it's
Like positive thinking, or there's another one out there that you go, as you're saying, the Toastmasters, or someone to teach you how to give speeches.
yeah. Oh, well, I'll think of the name. And Toastmaster. It was a men's Toastmasters club, and I was the only female there. And when you're called upon, whether you're a guest or what have you, to get up and do something or say something, you must. Well, here I was, just knees just knocking out, shaking all over, and I was called upon to debate either the pro or con of men are no damn good. And and I took the pro. And I just stood there, knees just knocking, but I could manage to get my eyes going all around the table. And I said, well, here I stand, the only female in a room full of males, and the males are so important to us females. And I said, I couldn't possibly say that men were no damn good, because females simply can't do without them. And that was the extent of that little speech. Anyway, that was the start. But Washington got to me. It was an unhealthy place to live at that time. And no single person was quite safe. That's the wrong word. Poor choice. Anyhow, I decided it was not a place where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And I'd already been out to Oregon the year before to visit all my friends up and down the coast. And I fell in love with Oregon, and so the friends there insisted that I move in with them to begin with, because they were having their first and only baby. And that's exactly what I did. I threw a cocktail party and put a price on everything I owned and sold it, and left for clearance, left behind the rest of it for clearance. And I packed my car and drove across the country to Oregon and stopped along the way, because, you may not go this route again. And places like the Grand Canyon, I took time out to do that. That was one example. And so I moved in with this couple, and I cooked their dinners at night, and I looked after that baby who screamed all the time, and they didn't know how to handle it. Of course, I'd had so many babies, you know. Any idiot could take care of a baby, you know. They were each saying the other should do this or do that. But it was most uncomfortable, and I couldn't wait to move out of there. Well, they had bought a place on the cliffside in Oregon, and they were tootling off to the mother's beach house, and they insisted that I stay in that house for the summer, and it wouldn't cost me anything. No. Of course, it was in horrible condition with all the stuff that had been left after 50 years of living there by two elderly women. I moved into that place against my better judgment, and I had just been washing the kitchen walls, which were absolutely filthy, and I was also ironing sheets with an old board that I put across the two counters in the kitchen, and I had left the cleaning right where it was until I finished the ironing, when my female friend came up from the beach, and she walked in and she said, my God, what's happened? And I said, what's happened was that I was cleaning your filthy, dirty walls, but I've decided that I'm no longer going to finish them. And I've got to get out of here. You know, I had already found a job. It didn't pay, it paid practically nothing. And they thought it was horrible that I had accepted it. But it was with a Canadian firm of consulting engineers. And I just fell in love with my work. The people were the engineers and the draftsmen were primarily from the United Kingdom countries. So it made for a great mixture of humanity, and one that I enjoyed. They had such keen sense of humor, and I made friends there that are my best friends today, with a continent separating us. Did I leave that hanging there? I don't know.
So you went to work with this engineering firm, and that's where you worked as long
Yeah.
as you were in Oregon.
Yeah, for the 30 years that I was in Oregon. Wonderful firm.
What did you do for the firm?
What?
What did you do for the firm?
And administrative. I continued to be private secretary to the president, but all of this other stuff which I enjoyed doing and didn't want to give up. In fact, I had not learned how to delegate. That was very hard for me. And of course I couldn't do everything myself. And it got to a point that I had to bring in somebody else to take over portions of it. And that person was secretary to an American, finally got into the president's church, although he was a vice president, I believe. And she moved right along with him. And she was determined to get rid of me, and she managed to. And so I retired. I was forced to retire 2 years early. And it turned out extremely well for me, though. The two presidents that I had worked for previously, they had some engineering work. They were both operating on their own and their own little businesses. And they had some business going on in-house at their old firm. And when they found out what had happened, they called This American and told them they wanted me treated exactly like the engineers were treated. And so I did far better by taking early retirement than I would have otherwise. And so, let's see.
Well, I know you're interested in art. Did you develop your art interest there, or was that always part of it?
That's where I started, actually. And I took night classes. The art museum, the art classrooms were adjacent and joined to the art museum at that time. The art museum now, the Great Pacific Northwest, has a lovely place of its own. And the art museum is a very fine museum. And we would study the art pieces in the museum. And I loved the classes there. And one of my nieces was graduated from UNCC in art. And there's so much difference in the way she learned and the way that I learned. Mine was far superior because they're pretty, they can only, for instance, I can't see them having nudes, for students to learn to draw. Well, how in the heck are you going to draw or paint a body if you haven't seen the body? And to me, the body is beautiful. It's all part of art, and I loved it. I love sculpting the best of all. But I'm actually too short to handle, big globs of clay. And I knew that it would get harder and harder the older I got. But I loved the sculpting in clay. And when I had to come back to Mooresville to look after an oldest sister, she and I had inherited the old home place, and she had been living there by herself. She could no longer handle it, and she was in horrible health, schizophrenic and all sorts of things. And I looked after her, and then I brought our old place up to date with flowers and plants and all of that. That part I enjoyed. And then she became very ill and had to be put in the hospital. And so from there, I got her into a nursing home. And I was not free of that, I was not free of having to look after her on a day-to-day basis until she went into the nursing home. And that was a pretty hard drain, So many people have to do it today. But, she died only 2 years ago. And she never knew that I sold the old home place, because she would have fought it every inch of the way. I couldn't handle it. I didn't have the money for the full mortgage. That too. I had to sell it. And this was when the youngest daughter of the first president of the engineering company that I worked for came and helped me. Now, she was from Oregon and was living part of her time out of the country, had to. She came and started packing everything that I owned. And then I was feeling better, and I began doing a little bit more of this. Well, we got everything I put 3 truckloads of furnishings in a yard sale at Prospect Presbyterian Church. I didn't go to that. And then she found a buyer. There was a buyer already who wanted the house. They had bought part of the property before. So I decided to sell to them. And this young friend handled everything to do with that mortgage and found me the place at Villages at Oak Tree, where I currently live. She handled that, and she is still handling my affairs from a distance. She's in Australia 6 months out of the year, so she'll be around here in a couple more months. That's my life.
You've had a very interesting life, and a very colorful one too, and you have seen a lot of the world, I know, because you have traveled a lot. But one thing I'm real anxious to hear about is your views of how Mooresville has changed since you have come back, the mindset of Mooresville as well as the physical change. I bet you could enlighten us about that.
Oh, it's, I could hardly believe Mooresville was Mooresville, you know. But even from the time that I've been living inside Mooresville, which is 01, this is the 6th year, I guess. So much has happened in that length of time. It is mind-boggling, really. This town was absolutely, nothing. Really. And it's just come alive. I mean, the old spots have come alive. And the roads, the streets, the sidewalks are now being completed and taken care of. The old storefronts are being modernized, and enough left to give the feel of how it was in looks. And I like this town of Mooresville now. So I'm happy to be living here.
Did you, when you were living here before, the first time when you were born, did you come to town, to Mooresville, to shop? Is this where you came to stores to buy clothes, or?
I suppose so.
Do you remember any of the shops that were here then, or?
Oh, John Mack. when I was working at the Charlotte Quartermaster Depot, I bought all my clothes there. And I never wore anything, nobody ever wore anything like what I had on. They were all quite different. And I was so upset when they closed their store. It was only, I never bought anything at Belk's. Belk's was downtown that time. But unless it was something simple like a pair of hose.
I think one thing that would be interesting for this interview to let people know that Mary Lee is quite a hiker. She loves to hike, even yet you do take walks now.
I walk now, yeah.
But you have been really a hiker, and that's something that's just great that you've been able to do.
I hope that I will always be able to walk. I can't climb like I did, and I used to climb on hiking to Mary's husband and then T.G. and Carol Phillips. And those three still hike, I think.
That's right.
And I walk. And occasionally I go out to near where Carol and T.G. live. And there's a wonderful street there. It turns off into their place. And during the daytime, there's no traffic whatsoever. And there are very few houses along this street. And it's a joy. It's very shut off, and here I am. And it has one dip, two dip, like ice cream. But it gives me enough, leg pull to help. I enjoy that very much. But if I don't go out there, then I walk around the area and where I live in the villages, and I can easily do 2 miles there. So I try to do a mile a day if time often doesn't permit, but that's my aim.
Well, that is good, and you do stay active and stay busy, and you play bridge and do all kinds of fun things that you can. And I just really admire Mary Lee so much for all that she's accomplished. I really do. I think that you have given us a lot of thought today, especially about how it was. One thing that we didn't talk a little bit about was, as a woman coming along during your time, when you were working with men, did you ever feel discrimination? Did you feel that you were, of course, the earning power that were in government service, it would be across the board? Was there a difference in wage in men and women?
Oh, yes. Of course, there were no men in my same category. The accountant, but and he was paid quite a bit more than I was and deserved it. I never felt that discrimination.
That's good.
I enjoy working with men, I must admit. Much easier to work with than women.
I agree.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the men treated you special?
Sir?
Did they treat you special because you were a woman in the workforce?
Now that could be. One of those two brothers, the one whose daughter came to help me. Last time I visited them, Springs in California. They were there for the winter.
Palm Springs?
Huh?
Palm Springs?
Yeah. And Palm Desert, which is next door.
Okay.
I visited there, and just before I was leaving, Dan said, "Mary Lee, you've been spoiled to death." And I just looked him straight in the face, blank look, and never said a word. Left it right there.
Some things are best said unsaid to get the point across.
That's right. That's right. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking your time today to share with us your life, which has been most interesting and colorful.
Oh.
And it sounds as if you managed to take the hard places and make them soft. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And some of the travels that I have done, which I did on my own, after moving, from Oregon, I think the most fantastic trip I made then was the other half of the Soviet Union. I went night school to study about Russia and things Russian. And I went first in 1976 to western part of the Soviet Union. And then in 1987, I joined a group. It's the most expensive trip I ever made, and I finished off the other part of the Soviet Union, the Asian portion, and Mongolia. And I lived in a yurt in Mongolia for, about 4 to 5 nights, that sort of thing. And that was it on on the first trip to the Soviet Union in the western portion, the professor who accompanied 12 students and I went out to dinner on the economy, and we joined some Russians and danced with them and drank champagne until we should have been starving for it, and had just a marvelous time. And so when we left, a bunch of officers had been at a table together, and they were celebrating a captain's promotion. Well, we were standing outside the building waiting for a taxi, and he came out, and he just did something like this, bingo, taxi. And so, I don't know what they said, but we got in the back seat of the taxi. Turned out we had been given an invitation to spend the night at this captain's apartment. Well, his poor pregnant wife got out of bed and was forced to bring beer and, fish, a dried fish. I thought I'd never forget the name of that, but I have. And I made the comment, this is delicious. You should never do that in a foreign country. And so my gift the next morning, when we left to go stand on the roadside waiting for a bus, I was given this fish wrapped in newspaper, and we could barely get on this bus. Had to leave the doors open because we could hang here and hang out the door. It was that packed. And here I was with that fish under the arm. And the other students didn't know what had happened to us. They were really upset when we finally made it back across town to it was a dormitory where students stayed where we were living. Anyway, and I was so hungover.
With your fish.
Yeah, with my fish.
Oh my goodness, what a story. How great.
But that was one of the most interesting. There were plenty others.
A lot of experiences.
Yeah, lots of them. I wish I could write well enough.
That would be good.
Get a tape recorder and just speak into it.
Yeah, I could.
But thanks again so much.
I didn't mean to rattle on.
No, that's wonderful.
See, you got me started and I can't
That's
stop.
right. That's right.
You do.
Yeah, I just such great memories.
You have a wonderful attic up there.
Yes. Yes, yes.
It should be
Stop the
empty.
tape.